Hi, I'm Jim Morrison, the principal of Tenafly High School, and this is my presentation on the plan for how do we reopen school in the fall. My pandemic response team was made up of administrators, including my vice principal, Rich Suchansky, director of guidance, Jane Bembridge, supervisor, Dr. Liz Giblin. We had staff, we had teachers, we had parents, and we had students. We were guided by the governor's document, which came out on June 26th, called The Road Back. In this document, a lot of discretion was left up to the local school districts, with one exception. A return to school in person in some way was mandated. My superintendent, Ms. DeMarco, has pointed out what's interesting is the images that are throughout this document look nothing like what school is actually going to look like when we return in the fall. In addition to that document, we surveyed both the staff and the parents as a district. We've had numerous principal meetings of the 4 elementaries, the middle school, and of course myself. There's a district-wide restart committee. And as I mentioned, this document was largely created by meeting with the Tenafly High School Pandemic Response Team, which initially started out as just an administrative group called the THS Task Force. We've also conducted meetings with my full staff, my big cabinet staff advisory panel, my little cabinet of students, and I've also attended a health services roundtable, which was made up by the school nurses, the school doctor, and parents in our community who are also medical professionals. That group's going to meet again later this week. I've also been keeping on top of what are the trends throughout the world in countries that have already reopened, in places like Israel, Japan, and South Korea. And I've attended workshops put on by the Department of Education and by the Principal and Supervisors Association, focusing on what are the legal issues around returning, and most recently about school security. Shauna's presentation is going to go into values for the district. For our purposes here, my committee boiled these down to basically 3 statements. First and foremost, what's important to us is the health and safety of our students and our staff. Our plan to return includes implementing every precaution possible to help prevent the spread of this disease. We also have to take into account the social, emotional wellness of our students, staff, and our parents. And what I'm referring to here is there is a risk to coming back to school, but there's also a risk for our students for not coming back to school. And we know that there is not only an educational cost to the virtual learning, but there's also a social and emotional cost for that isolation to continue. And I include the parents here because I think we have to acknowledge that maybe not since 1918 has there been a situation where there's been so much anxiety about returning to school, as we have now. So our mission is to find a way to balance these 2 goals so we return in the safest way possible, and we offer an educational program with the current circumstances in mind, but that is meaningful enough to be worth the effort that we're going to put in. We looked at many different variables, many different ways to cohort our students, for example. 1/3, could you keep the kids in the room? And ultimately, our desire was to keep the individual students' schedules intact. Unlike at other levels at the high school, some of our courses have 4 different levels, and each student picks what electives they want and what level of each required course that best fits their interests and their academic development. This summer, we're going to be setting up classrooms with less furniture and furniture that's spread to give as much social distancing as possible, and including some new broadcasting technology, which I'll address a little bit later. We're also looking at adding tents and utilizing outdoor spaces for classes like PE or some of our larger classes, or things like band and choir, where being outside is much safer and we can spread out. We're going to need professional development for our staff. to continue to develop for virtual learning. And I think we did a great job in the spring, considering when we went out on March 13th, probably 99% of the staff had never taught a class virtually. And with that in mind, we rose to the occasion and put together something that was absolutely stunning for the conditions we had. Now that we've had more training moving forward, we expect to be even better with our virtual teaching. And then, of course, the next point there is health and safety. Our staff needs to be trained on what are the procedures going to be for cleaning, what are going to be the rules for our students, etc. Of course, we're going to be depending upon our local health department, and we'll be paying attention to what's going on in Bergen County, New Jersey, and the country as a whole. We'll need to stock up on our supplies. Each student at the beginning of the year will be given 2 face masks to wear. Our staff will be given cleaning equipment and face masks, and those are things we're going to have to be obviously keeping up on. And we're going to have to set clear expectations for what's going on virtually and what are going to be the penalties for students that perhaps are lax in following our guidelines, which I'll come back to. Our plan is to create 2 cohorts, one called Tiger, one called Pride, and I'll go into that schedule shortly. Before all the students come in, before Labor Day, we plan to have the freshmen come in. This is something we've always done, but here it'll be spread out with 2 cohorts over 2 days so that the freshmen get a chance to get acclimated to the building, meet their teachers before the upperclassmen come in. We will also offer new students a chance for some kind of orientation as well with their guidance counselors. We are going to require masks to be worn at all times by both students and staff. We're hoping to eventually get some clear face coverings for staff so that students can see their emotions as they're teaching. And this is just something that's going to be in line with our other safety drills, like a fire drill, lockdown, shelter in place. The wearing of a mask by a student is considered part of safety. So we will have to put in place penalties if a student willfully doesn't wear their mask properly, because we're going to have to take that very, very seriously. We know that even if we do screening of people with temperatures, some of the people that spread this disease are asymptomatic, and the way to cut down on that is to require people to wear masks. As you can see from these illustrations, school is going to look different, and that's just going to be something that we're going to have to get. I mentioned that band and choir may have to be outside. With the instruments, you have the air being blown out. With the choir, it's great technique to really use your lungs, but with this disease, of course, that's not an ideal thing. So if we can get students spread out, especially outside where it's safe, we could even use the auditorium or the gym, or if we can get some tents. We had freshmen, when they were on IDT, have to sign into one of our common areas. I'm experimenting with the idea of maybe even freshmen will be allowed to leave the campus. Part of our problem is going to be fitting students when they have off periods in our building in a socially distanced way. Our building is fine if kids are allowed to sit near each other. But if they're not, we're going to face a space challenge when we have teachers that are absent or when the weather is bad and students don't leave during their IDT. We're looking at the cafeteria as a great space that we can have students when they have a free period, repurposing the furniture in the library and the Tiger Study Den so we can fit more students at a greater social distance apart from each other. Our attendance protocols is going to be a really big change for our culture. We have students that take their academics very seriously, and they're afraid if they miss a class that they're going to fall behind. And so we have students that will, take Advil and come to school. And with this disease, we have to really turn that around and say to students, we want you to stay home. We want you to quarantine if you have been around someone who's been in Florida or you yourself have traveled to one of those places. And we're going to have to come up with language that if a student identifies, I'm home because of caution of COVID-19, then those absences will not count against that student. It will help if we have live streaming in the room. And again, I'm going to come back to that. Although we're going to relax our attendance policy if students identify that they're being, cautious, we are going to return to normal for all other grading. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll have to put in our Tiger Q what are going to be the rules for live streaming, for wearing face masks, etc. So phase one for the high school plan is that we split the student body in half by the alphabet. At a rough glance, it looks like that would be A through KOO would be in cohort Tiger, and from KOO through Z would be in cohort Pride. By the way, I am aware that a group of tigers is not called a pride. That is a group of lions. Here we are using it in the sense of pride in being a tiger. We would not serve lunch, and at least to start, there would be no in-person clubs. Whether or not we're going to have virtual clubs or when we would have virtual clubs needs to be revisited. The key is, while cohort Tiger is learning in the classroom, we need to have technology so that students who are home can be participating in that lesson live and learning with their fellow students that are in the building. We looked at some monitors where the teacher can see right in front of them the students that are home, as well as the class. And this is where the professional development will come in, because there are many creative ways where teachers can design lessons where students who are home could possibly be paired up with students that are in the room, where they call each other on their cell phone, they do a pair and share, or they work in groups, or while this part of the room in person is working on something, the teacher pivots and addresses the students that are home. But that will take time for us to develop those lessons that bring both of those groups in and make them feel like they're part of the class and are participating. E-Day, all students will be home and learning virtually. And we look at E-Day as probably being on Mondays to allow for, one, the building to be closed to students for 3 consecutive days. So if there's a student who contracts the virus Friday night, well, maybe by Tuesday morning before they come in, they have symptoms, and so they know to stay home. Another benefit of having this day be virtual is this keeps our students and our staff sharp in their virtual learning skills in case somewhere down the road we have to pivot once again to go all virtual. So all those kinks that might happen, we can work out early on. And the virtual learning eventually will be just following the E-Day schedule with teachers addressing their whole classes live, at least for the start of the period, if not for the whole thing. Perhaps the first couple virtual E-Days would be asynchronous to allow for teachers to, again, get professional development. For PE, we face a challenge in that PE right now is not allowed to exercise inside the building. So the only way we can have PE is outdoors. So we're thinking that when PE is at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, those students will have virtual asynchronous PE class. We'll be given an assignment, given to a certain time to get it done, and then log that. The benefits are that's one cohort less of students that we have in the building each day. As I said, we're looking to split the student body in half, and we would alternate each day. So that would mean AB, AB, 0, meaning E-Day is the 0 day, which probably would be Monday. We're looking at every other day because of the way our schedule works. We want every kid to experience each of the days, A, D, C, B, every other week. And so by alternating days, we don't have to have one group of students go basically 4 days in a row while the other group is off for 4 days. The schedule that we're looking at right now is an extended half day. A half day right now ends at noon. This one ends an hour later. But it does enable us to get all of our 6 periods each day in. Right now we built in 11 extra minutes for block 1 for whatever the screening is going to be for students when they arrive at the building. And 4 minutes for block 2, which is something we do during the year for our TV announcements. Each period then is about 44 minutes of learning with 4 minutes of passing time. At the end of the day, we could stagger dismissal, dismissing the first floor some days first or some weeks first, and then dismissing the second floor as well. Period to period staggered dismissal doesn't really work because there's no place for those dismissed kids to go because the other teachers are still holding their classes back. And we really want to minimize the amount of time that students are in the hallway. Benefits of this plan versus others: we only have to get screening for half of our building one time each day. And each day there's only one cohort of students, half the student body in the building. The downside of this is each student's only going to school live 2 days a week, and they're getting 10 hours of in-person learning. And if they have all 6 classes, to go from 8 to 1 is a long time to go without food. And right now, with masks on at all times in the building, no eating will be allowed in the building. So if a student has IDT, an off period, they can go outside, of course, and space out and take their masks off and have a snack. The staff will be very, very prone to letting a student who raises their hand and says, listen, I have 6 classes today. Can I go outside for a minute and grab a snack? Our staff is, unless they're giving a test or something, going to allow that. There are 4 interior periods, and we'll have to figure out, how do we house students that don't have class in a way where they can be socially distant. If you have a kid in the high school now, you know that our campus center is the library. And students pack that area because it's comfortable, it's very social. Mr. DiGregorio has made it very enticing to be there with the chess boards, the aquarium, and that's going to have to change, at least for the near future, with desks spaced out. And once those desks are full, no one else is coming in. But we will still have the cafeteria and the tiger study den. We still have to work on, as a district, what will that screening look like? We've been talking about parents signing off on 5 questions or something like that, an attestation form attesting to my son has not or daughter has not been to Florida, shown any symptoms, etc. We're also looking at temperature checks and who does that, where is that done, and that's a district thing that is being worked out, but we don't have the answers to that, at this exact moment. We do know we want to start the year without any lockers and no locker rooms. So going to PE, the next bullet, that means there's no changing for PE. So PE class outside is going to have to involve things to help kids just get their mind off of work and some relaxation, some stretching, maybe some walking, things that you're basically not going to perspire too much because we don't have the ability for you to change your shirt and then go to class. Students are going to be expected to have their cameras on during the virtual learning when they're home looking in, so that when that staff member looks at whatever screen we have set up, they can see what kids are there paying attention, maybe what students have their hands up asking a question. Some students don't want to show us, where they are in their house. We'll have to show them ways to create a virtual background. I know on Zoom, I frequently have had the Golden Gate Bridge as the background rather than show, where I'm sitting in my house. But that's going to be required, that students have their cameras on, that they follow along from home. Attendance will be taken there. And the good news is at the high school and also at the middle school, we are going 1-to-1. So all students will be issued a device from the school that does have a camera on it. And of course, homework, studying expectations are going to return to normal. Now, when I say return to normal, my staff has always been very compassionate. When we know of situations, especially through the guidance department, where there are extenuating circumstances, we always work with those individual students to make sure that we are fair and that we are sympathetic. But overall, this is not the spring. This is now, you're going to be graded on things just as if we were still in school. Should the nation continue on the trend that New Jersey is in right now, and we have less cases, then maybe we would move on to phase 2 at some point, where each cohort now goes to school for a full day. And this would include serving lunch in some kind of spaced out manner. And then hopefully by the end of the year, we get to a place where all of the students are back in the school. We're creating a brand new schedule. We're doing it in a very short period of time. So we know that there are things that will come up and we will have to improvise. We'll have to adapt and meet challenges that right now we're unaware of. But we are aware of some things that we don't have the answers to yet, but as a district, we are working on. I mentioned the student screening process. I know this week, as I mentioned, we're meeting again with our medical experts, both professionally and in the community as parents. What's on everyone's mind is what's going to be the process when a student tests positive or a staff member tests positive. And in those cases, we're going to be working with our local Board of Health. And I'm sure what we're going to be looking at is what are the trends in Tenafly for the virus? What are the trends in Bergen County and New Jersey? And I think it's going to be a much different situation if there are no new cases in the town, but we have one student test positive, versus if we're in a situation where multiple students test positive and there are new cases in the town and in the county. But as for a set process, we don't have one, at this time. We also, at this point, don't know which teachers would opt to not return because of underlying health conditions, and how will we, plug those gaps, and also what do we do with students who decide to stay home as well. We're awaiting guidance from the state on those last two issues in particular. To go back to, the why. At the high school level, particularly, we're going to be really good at virtual teaching. And we started to get there, and we're going to continue to improve upon that. And the academics is something that we feel like we could really provide. Maybe not exactly the same, but we can get there. The downside is so much of high school learning happens outside of the academic classroom. And what I mean are the times when you socialize with your friends, and when you go to clubs and you participate in activities, maybe for the first time outside of the classroom, to explore, what your interests are. And on the screen, you can see graduation. This spring, we had a virtual graduation, which had some really great aspects to it. Most of our students gave a 10-second, shout out to whoever they wanted. And that was very individualized and in many cases very touching, when they thanked their parents and their family and their friends, and even their teachers got a lot of shout outs. We also had a car parade, which was great. But even after both of those things, there was a desire for the students to come together one last time in person, which ultimately, thanks in large part to our superintendent and to our board, we were able to do. And there's just something about, when kids are together in person that is so crucial to our development as human beings. And this illustration I chose because I think it's a lot more fun to show your individuality with your graduation cap when it's an in-person graduation, rather than the virtual graduation. So it's very natural for our parent community in particular to be anxious. I have my own anxiety about my son going into 5th grade at Stillman. But I think we can do this in a way that is safe and that makes it worth it, balancing the risks of bringing people out of their homes, versus the cost to kids for being isolated and continuing just the virtual learning. So that's my presentation. I look forward to hosting some Q&A sessions, one at the end of July and the other one in mid-August. Thank you for watching.